Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Join us as we delve into the world's most pressing issues and learn how the people inside work toward a better future for everyone around the world.
Coming up on UN Insider.
Fairness and justice on the Palestinian question lies in the two-state solution.
Working to end the violence in the Middle East. China's foreign minister leads a high-level meeting focused on solutions to the brutal conflict between Israel and Hamas. Plus a look at China's leadership role on the UN Security Council.
The month of its presidency of the Security Council has in fact proven quite successful.
Melting glaciers, intense storms, rising temperatures, and an urgent call to action. Delegates from around the world gather in Dubai for the UN's Climate Change Conference. Next.
China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi spent part of this week at UN headquarters. He met with Secretary General Antonio Guterres and other diplomats. He also chaired a key Security Council meeting on the ongoing conflict between Israel and Hamas. Jody Jacobs has the details.
It was a high-level interministerial meeting called for by China, which holds the Council presidency for the month of November. Several foreign ministers from other member states were in attendance. Addressing the meeting, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said dialogue and negotiation is the best way to save lives.
We should revitalize the political prospects of the two-state solution with stronger determination. Israel has long established an independent state, and the Jews are no longer without a home, but the right of the Palestinian people to statehood, their right to existence, and their right to return have long been ignored. This is the crux of the repeated turbulence in the Palestinian-Israeli situation. Fairness and justice on the Palestinian question lies in the two-state solution. This is irreplaceable.
During the meeting, Wang Yi announced that China will provide another aid package to Gaza to address the humanitarian crisis. Since the start of the conflict, China has provided cash assistance, food, medicine, and other emergency supplies. Wang Yi has called for more aid corridors to be opened, saying relying on only the Rafah crossing to transport humanitarian supplies to Gaza is far from enough.
We are calling for unhindered humanitarian access into Gaza so that the nearly 2 million people in Gaza will be able to survive and live their lives. And those are the basic needs of civilians in Gaza. The deprivation of water, electricity, and medicine should not continue in today's world, not in the 21st century. Today we have announced that China will send a new batch of aid to the Gaza Strip, and that will be delivered as quickly as possible.
Wang Yi's announcement of additional aid echoes the call by the UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, who says the current level of aid cannot meet the needs of more than 2 million people in Gaza. Guterres says while he welcomes the current fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, its full implementation is not enough, and a ceasefire must be the next step.
Civilians, including United Nations personnel, must be protected. Civilian objects, including hospitals, must be protected. UN facilities must not be hit. International humanitarian law must be respected by all parties to the conflict at all times.
Several Security Council members have called for aid to Gaza to be scaled up and for civilians to be protected. The Palestinian Foreign Minister has called on the Security Council to act decisively before all of Gaza is destroyed. Hamas is seeking a 4-day extension to the pause in fighting. Israel says for every 10 hostages released, it's willing to extend the truce by 24 hours. As last-minute talks continue between Israel and Hamas on a possible extension of this fragile truce in Gaza, China's top diplomat says that the Security Council and the UN needs to work on a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire with the greatest urgency. Jody Jacobs, CGTN at the United Nations.
Shu Deja is monitoring developments inside the halls of the United Nations. Deja.
Yes, Elaine, with the agreement of a hostage swap between Hamas and Israeli government, Gaza finally enjoyed a short pause with silenced guns. So for the past week, the UN team also has scaled up its operation to send more humanitarian aid in and across Gaza Strip. According to OCHA, Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, the UN managed to send about 200 trucks daily after the pause into Gaza Strip. This Wednesday, I asked about the possibility of another extension of pause and what that could mean for the UN humanitarian operation. What could be another 4 days extra pause would do to humanitarian aid delivery?
Well, pretty clear. It would, given that it would silence the guns for a further amount of time, it would allow for us to distribute aid safely, for people to receive aid safely, and it would stop people getting killed.
Does the UN hope that the possibility of another extension could lead to maybe an even longer period of
listen,
pauses?
I think we all have to be very realistic. I think we're taking this one day at a time, but we do hope, obviously, that there's an extension, and the Secretary General has been reiterating his call for a humanitarian ceasefire.
Of course, the visit of Mr. Wang Yi, Minister for Foreign Affairs of China, made big news here in the UN. Not only did he chair the high-level Security Council meeting on Palestinian question, he also met with foreign ministers from Arabic Islamic countries, including Qatar, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, Egypt, Indonesia, and UAE, Malaysia, to discuss current situation in Gaza Strip as well as a long-term solution. Mr. Wang Yi also met with the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, pushing for humanitarian ceasefire as well as aid delivery. After the Security Council meeting, I was able to ask Mr. Wang Yi about China's thought to push for a fundamental solution to Palestinian question, and here is his answer.
过去多年以来，巴以冲突在反复的上演，导致大量的人员伤亡以及人道灾难。中国对于如何阻止下一次的这个巴以冲突的爆发，以及推动从根本上来解决巴勒斯坦问题，有什么建议呢？谢谢。
The two-state solution is the only way to fundamentally resolve the Palestinian question. What is lacking for the settlement of the Palestinian question is not grand plans or slogans, but the courage and the actions needed to stand up for justice. The two-state solution is the bottom line for international justice. There's no stepping back from that. The establishment of an independent state is the undeniable national right of the Palestinian people, which cannot be traded away in the face of the historical injustice long suffered by the Palestinian people. No one has an excuse to drag their feet. There's no justification for inaction when it comes to the issues bearing on the future of the Palestinian people. No country has a veto, right? The Palestinian question is the core of the Middle East issue, and it must be prioritized, not marginalized on the international agenda. Only when the two-state solution is fully implemented can the Middle East enjoy genuine peace and Israel enjoy lasting security. China calls for the convening of a more broad-based, authoritative, and more effective international peace conference to further build consensus for peace and work out a concrete timetable and roadmap to push for a comprehensive, just, and lasting solution to the Palestinian question.
We also have COP28 in Dubai this week, and the Secretary General participates in the meeting, and we will have more on this key climate summit next week.
As China's tenure as rotating Security Council president comes to an end, I sat down with Dennis Francis, president of the 78th UN General Assembly.
I'd like to get your reflections on China's role at the United Nations and its most recent role at the UN Security Council as rotating president.
Well, China is a very active member, and reliably so, of the United Nations. There is only one China in terms of its voice. When China speaks, people listen attentively. And I have to say that the month of its presidency of the Security Council has in fact proven quite successful, not just for China, for the UN, for the international system, and most importantly, for the people of Gaza. because it was under China's leadership of the Council that the Security Council finally was able to agree a resolution after 5 attempts before. So to sum up, one would have to make the assessment that China's leadership has been exemplary of the Council and is most welcome.
For you as a longtime career diplomat, how important are the different voices, the different perspectives when it comes to trying to solve major conflicts?
It's extremely important because conflicts are not unidimensional. And that's part of the complication of the Gaza conflict, as indeed is the case in Ukraine. There are layers and layers and layers. There's precedent. There are pre-existing situations that trigger countries to behave in certain ways. And so it's very important that all the voices are heard. Everyone, that's the nature of multilateralism.
Small or large?
Small or large. It is the core of multilateralism that durable solutions, permanent solutions, are not feasible and cannot be imposed by a few. You need the collaborative voices of all to accept and to take ownership for the outcomes and the solutions that will resolve long-standing contentious issues. And so that is the magic, I think is the word, the magic of multilateralism. It's never perfect. Multilateralism never makes a claim to be perfect. What it does claim to do is to avoid tensions and to make everyone feel comfortable that they can live with a result that is suboptimal but workable. That's the magic.
Coming up.
Science tells us we have around 6 years before we exhaust the planet's ability to cope with our emissions.
UN Insider.
We are CGTN, China Global Television Network.
All eyes are on Dubai. That's where leaders from around the world are gathering for the UN's climate conference known as COP28. It has been 8 years since the Paris Climate Agreement set a goal of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050. And since then, we've seen a movement toward climate goals, but it hasn't been enough. And now delegates are gathering in the UAE, are facing an increase in climate events, rising global temperatures, and rapidly melting glaciers.
Egypt, the president of the last conference of parties and the leader of all COP negotiations during the last year, says it's extremely worried. Giving his final words as president of COP27, Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry said that climate financing is shrinking at a time it should be doubling.
Rather than increasing climate finance from developed countries, actually it's decreasing in relation to the growing needs and the increasing cost of finance in developing countries. The expansion of fossil fuel exploration and production, in particular of coal, in countries that previously committed to substantially phase down. Another worrying sign is the increased gap in renewable energy expansion and availability.
The United Nations climate body UNFCCC too is alarmed.
We are taking baby steps, stepping far too slowly from an unstable world that lacks resilience to working out the best responses to the complex impacts that we are facing. We must teach climate action to run, because this has been the hottest year ever in humanity. So many terrible records were broken. Science tells us we have around 6 years before we exhaust the planet's ability to cope with our emissions, before we blow through 1.5 degree limits.
The presidency of COP moved to Sultan Ahmed Al Jaber, the former head of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. Leading one of the biggest power companies in the world, Al Jaber called participants to lead what he described as unconventional changes in climate negotiations.
Since Paris, we have made some progress. But we also know that the road we have been on will not get us to our destination in time. We must look for ways and ensure the inclusion of the role of fossil fuels. We collectively have the power to do something unprecedented.
The UAE says COP this year will engage intensively with high-emission industries like aluminum, steel, cement, and public transportation. Unlocking affordable green financing for developing countries and allocating finance for the Loss and Damage Fund remain to be a major challenge and a target for participants this year.
Criticism fell on the UNFCCC for choosing an oil-rich nation like the UAE to lead and influence climate talks throughout the next year. However, some say that the Gulf nation's influential power in the oil and gas field could finally ease the usual deadlock with oil giants across the world. Aidel Mahroui, CGTN, Dubai.
Ahead of COP28, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres traveled to the area known as the roof of the world. The Himalayas are usually covered in snow and ice, but the landscape is changing dramatically. The Secretary General called for immediate action.
Record temperatures mean record glacier melt. Nepal has lost close to 1/3 of its ice in just over 30 years. Antarctica and Greenland are losing billions of tons of ice mass every year. Melting glaciers mean swollen lakes and rivers flooding, sweeping away entire communities, and seas rising at record rates, threatening coastal communities across the globe. The crisis is gaining speed.
Coming up.
It is important to put the climate change in the first priority in the international agenda.
UN Insider.
Whether it's about your education, the home you live in, or the items you buy, your money has a story to tell. Because every business story is a human story. Global Business.
Climate change impacts us all, but for smaller developing nations, the risks are magnified. Cuba has seen intense droughts, warmer waters, and powerful storms. I sat down with Gerardo Peñalver Portal, Cuba's ambassador to the UN.
Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. Cuba is on the front lines of climate change, surrounded by rising seas, extreme droughts, and even bigger storms. And that all impacts your agriculture, your infrastructure, and the way of life for people in your country. What have you personally experienced over the years, and how are you trying to use that voice at the United Nations?
Well, you know, Cuba has a tradition as a developing country trying to concentrate its efforts to unite the developing countries in the confronting climate change. In the early 90s, when we experienced the historical Earth Summit in Brazil, in Rio, our historic leader, Fidel Castro, he made an historical statement calling the attention about the situation of the rising of the sea level, the global warming, and the necessity to dedicate more efforts and more resources to deal with the issue of climate change. Because Cuba is a small island developing state. We have risks, we are vulnerables, and we understand very well the gravity and the importance of the issue of climate change. And we have used our condition of chairmanship of G77 this year to try to put the climate issue on the first
priority in the agenda of the G77 plus China. Our president is now arriving to the United Arab Emirates to participate in the COP28, and we will convey a summit of leaders of the G77 plus China within the COP28 on December the 2nd, and we will raise this issue, the need to unite our forces to ask the developed world to dedicate efforts, financial resources to combat climate change, for example, to allocate resources in the finance, climate finance, to operationalize the loss and damage fund, to dedicate efforts to also to deal with the mitigation and adaptation. All of these issues are paramount importance for the developing world, especially for small island developing states like the Caribbean, like the Pacific Island.
G77 represents 80% of the world's population. What will be the president's biggest message at COP28?
I think that the biggest message would be it is important to put the climate change in the first priority in the international agenda, and for that we must discuss other important issues, like, for example, the existing world economic order, the necessity to talk about debt relief, the necessity to reform the international financial institutions, the necessity to grant the flows of resources to the combat climate change. Also, we have to, if we want to get into the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to put the climate change as one of the priorities, because if not, we're not going to have sustainable development. We're not going to achieve the 2030 agenda if we don't achieve the climate goals.
We already know that 2023 is expected to be the hottest on record. So let's go to your country for a moment. What is Cuba hoping to accomplish by 2030?
Well, first of all, Cuba is, in terms of global emissions, we contribute only with 0.2% of the global emissions, but we have a state plan to confront with climate change. The name is a life task, and it is a research until 2100 of all the impact of the climate change in our island, in our ecosystem, in our nature, in our social and economic development. And also, it's not only a diagnosis, but it's a plan of measures and actions that we should take to deal with the climate change. Our parliament is about to pass an environmental law. We have also a governmental plan to diminish the participation of the fossil energy in our energy matrix. So we are now at about 5% of our generation of power of energy is based on renewable energy. So we have a plan to increase until 2030 to 24%. That is a very ambitious plan, but we have the possibility and the natural conditions, especially related to wind energy and also related to solar energy. We have to introduce also the issue of climate change in the universities, in the schools. We have to do more with our children, our young generation, that they understand the necessity to fight for the preservation of nature, and to give also priority to the issues of climate change, of global world. We have, for example, desertification. It's a great problem in the east part of the country. We have, for example, the intrusion of salt water in the soil that diminish the productivity of our soils for the agriculture. We have hurricanes in the Caribbean. So you witness that the hurricanes are stronger every year, and they are very often because, you know, the fuel for the hurricanes is warm water. And with the increase of the global temperature, with a small developing island, we suffered this impact. So that's why Cuba also, one of the priorities is to develop a strong civil defense. When there is a hurricane, well, there is a whole system, the civil defense, evacuating people, allocating people, resources, animals, to avoid great losses by a hurricane. We have also transferred this experience to our neighbors in the Caribbean. We have also helped our neighbors to improve their capacities in facing with these important issues as a whole.
Ambassador Pinelo-Portal, thank you so much for your time.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN insider. Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York.
I'm sure this program will open up a new window for the audience to learn more about the UN, about multilateral diplomacy, and about China's role on the international stage.
We should develop a consensus around dialogue. Wars are destructive. Wars don't solve problems.
There is no action that is good enough for the planet if it is not good for the people.
Every day across the world, we are supporting countries in realizing their national development aspirations.
Congratulations on launching the UN Insider. It's an important program because it brings the United Nations to the people.
I would like to convey my salutations to UN Insider. I think it's very important for all the population in the world to understand what is happening within the UN.
I sat down with David Torres.
I do hope that this new show will make more people know more about the United Nations.
Bold, unprecedented action must follow.
Inclusion is such an important dimension of the philosophy of the United Nations and of the General Assembly.
Congratulations for all the people who are producing this UN Insider.
China is one of the most important financial contributors to peacekeeping.
Yo quiero destacar la importancia de un programa clave que es UN Insider. Los invito a ver este programa que trata sobre todo lo relacionado con las Naciones Unidas.
UN Insider, I hope, will be successful, and it will highlight the importance of multilateralism and what is going on, and shed light on the various aspects that are associated with this international community and how it operates.
UN Insider is a wonderful initiative. In the UN, we are 193 nations that gather together here and discuss and try to find solutions for all of the problems of mankind.